yes, consistency of load is really important, but monotony also contributes to overtraining, and monotony is just doing the same thing for a long period of time. It gets boring.
Welcome back to the Athlete Edge podcast. Over the next few weeks, we'll be discussing how training priorities evolve across ages and stages of life. So we'll cover topics around training, health considerations, and education. First up is our 12 to 18-year-old age group, which takes up about 85% of our current gym. So Tim, what are our main training focuses for this age group?
Yeah, absolutely. So really important age group, obviously starts to really shape who they're going to become as an athlete into their adult years. We really want to make sure we're building a great foundation in and around technique, coordination, quality movement patterns. So if I think the first one I'll talk about is strength. So if we think of our gym training, here we're talking about what we've mentioned in the past around developing the hardware. The key here is it's not just how much you can lift. So we think strength, we think, yep, load on the bar, yep, I'm strong. Yes, we want to produce force, so absolutely there's an element of that. But things like eccentric control, so how you work when you're lowering the weight, for example, is a really important skill and transfers a lot to our sport. Mobility, stiffness, control, balance, coordination, all these sort of terms become important, and this is why we need a really well-rounded program. So we need to nail, yes, the basics around squat, hinge, push-pull, lunge, brace, rotate, but we also want to make sure we're doing different setups of certain movements. So like, can you do a range of different squats, whether that's front squat, back squat, goblet squat, split squat, because all these things load things slightly differently and have different strength and mobility and coordination demands that helps develop really well-rounded athletes. Even the tempo, so how fast down versus how fast you come up, is there any pauses in there, all has an implication and a certain, I guess, outcome we're trying to train for based on the prescription there. The big mistake there too is also making sure that things are measured. So there's no point doing the same thing and the same weights and the same reps over and over. Just as bad is doing random workouts every session. So having a plan, having a program to follow that, yes, evolves, but at the same time needs some sort of progression in there, which a lot of the young athletes I talk to either are doing nothing or they might be doing stuff, but it's still probably too random. There's not enough structure in and around this stuff.
How often should athletes be progressing in terms of weight, reps? What does that kind of look like?
I've always liked, so pretty much every session, there should be some mini progressions. So whether that's a little bit heavier or a little bit faster or a little bit more, so like 1 to 2 reps more. So there's a small increase because that'll influence your volume for the session. In terms of like a bigger change, I've always liked 4 to 6 weeks. So you should stick to something pretty similar for about that time point. So say 5 weeks in the middle, and then you might look to flick a few things over in terms of, swap out a back squat for a split squat or, change things up. So it's similar, but it's changing the focus. One, to keep people fresh, because we know, yes, consistency of load is really important, but monotony also contributes to overtraining, and monotony is just doing the same thing for a long period of time. It gets boring. So yes, we want to have some variety, make it fun, have a change up, but we need enough time between the start and the end to make sure we can actually get good at something. We don't just do footy training for 3 weeks and think, yeah, we're sweet, let's play and never train again. Obviously, it's a constantly evolving thing. We want to progress that just like we do our gym training. In and around training speed, so obviously a big thing for us, we get a lot of questions around technique and how to get faster. Proper acceleration mechanics, I see that's a big one, and we're going to talk about some of the other stuff other people are doing. I see a lot of training kids are doing actually makes acceleration worse. So they think they're doing speed drills and accelerating, but because they're accelerating the wrong way, they're only reinforcing the wrong patterns, and they create more problems for us when we get them, because now we're seeing there's all these other things we've got to fix and almost unlearn. A lot of that relates to your posture, your front side running shapes. Most young athletes can run, but very few are taught or know how to sprint, to how to do that well and execute that under high intensities, under speed. That links to our gym and our strength. So the reason why I said gym first, even though most of what we do is a speed focus, is because without that hardware, all the speed drills in the world aren't going to help. in my experience, because if kids aren't strong enough or can't control their body, then we can't coach them speed. It's just doing reps, which still has a benefit, but they get more benefit if they're doing both together. So linking that is movement quality. So every rep, your jump, your landing is all practice. You want to get better. How you move matters more than what you can lift. And this is where volume can be the enemy here. So you need rest. You need to be smart. Consistency is another big one in and around their training. So you don't need to be fancy and you don't need random workouts. You just need something that, like we said, you can be consistent with, that you can track, that it's quality, that you can progress over time. And as we're talking about, obviously offering information. The hard thing is that kids in this age group are just bombarded with information. So when it comes to training, you can look up any influencer, any gym, any athlete, and they're sharing training advice. So here it is, find someone you trust that you think makes sense, and just almost don't listen to too many people, because you'll only get more confused.
And I think that, we've seen that in some of our own athletes who they've got physios that they're consulting, they've got head coaches that they're consulting from their local club, they've got parents plus us, and then it's too many cooks in the kitchen, and ends up sort of doing everything poorly and nothing really well, and sticking to a plan, like you said.
I don't know how many times I've had the conversation where I say something that maybe disagrees with people. They're like, that makes sense. I'm like, it's a daily occurrence. It's like, people think, most of the advice out there has got to be good. It's probably the other way around. There's probably 10% of what's being advised I would agree with.
And it's probably one of those things, even if it's not the best advice, you're probably better off following just one person's advice instead of 10 people.
Correct.
So if we transition into why that matters for our athletes, give us a bit of an insight.
Well, in this age group, and we've sort of talked about this before with some of our adults, if you can get it right now in that 12 to 18, learn how to train well, you'll be building strength, discipline, movement skills that will actually set you up for life. So it's not complicated in this age group, even though we want to make it. It's just being really consistent, and that consistency will not only get you results, but develop the habits that will then hold you in great stead for whatever you do moving forward. And that's just not in sport.
And I think that's also understanding that it is a 4 to 5 year journey. It's not.
Yep.
It's no quick results, no quick fixes.
And I think we're like a lot of the kids we talk to, and I was guilty of this. It's quick to blame others. It's easy to make excuses. I'm a big believer now when I see kids that get drafted, don't get drafted, get opportunities, make rep teams, don't. Even my own stuff. Doors only open when you're ready. So it's a little bit of like kind of fate, I guess, philosophy. But if you're not ready, the opportunity doesn't present. So all you've got to do is look at yourself, think, what can I do better? What do I need to do? And actually just get to work. Essentially all it comes down to.
Sometimes it takes a door to get shut in your face for you to sort of pivot and have a look internally and sort of rethink what you need to do going forward. And so when it comes to training, what are some key considerations from a health perspective that athletes and parents need to consider, especially at this age group?
Yeah, so the 12 to 18s, it's obviously it's not a big age bracket, but there's a lot happening across that age group. So bodies are changing really, really quickly. So how you manage that, your load and your training is going to have a big implication in terms of whether you're really durable during that phase or whether you start to break down. So a big part of that is the peak height velocity. So this is where the body will go through its fastest rate of growth outside of when they're a baby. So for girls, typically around 12 to 15, for boys a bit later, 14 to sort of 17. And it's hard because not only his brain and nervous system and all the coordination trying to catch up, we're physically changing our bodies. We're getting longer limbs, bones, muscles, tendons are trying to catch up. Well, they're actually growing. So what we see is in and around, like a lot of kids that are really active, severs, that's that back of the heel pain. It often starts at that earlier, sort of the lower end of that bracket. Middle to later, it starts to see a little bit more higher prevalence around the Osgood Slatter. So that's similar growth plate inflammation sort of stuff around the knees. And then a range of other injuries like recurring soreness, lots of like minor sort of muscle pulls and sort of joint pain. Basically off the fact that if the body's not ready for that load because it's growing, so you're getting taller, longer limbs, you're getting heavier, coordination goes out the window a little bit at times, We're not necessarily catching up our strength and our movement quality to the rate at which we're growing. And then you throw in all this extra sport. Often rep teams are happening at this age. Kids play multiple sports. So now we get this bombardment of load at a time where we're actually most susceptible. So that's why we start to see some of these injuries. When you throw in their sport, plus school sport, whatever else the club's got them doing, home gym, extra running, on top of poor sleep, average nutrition, now you get a mixing pot of, a low energy, injury prone athlete.
So how can athletes sort of balance the volume? Obviously there is a lot of, I guess the better athlete you are, the more demands you have from, if it's rep, school, whatever it is, you're getting pulled in different directions. So how can athletes manage their workload, especially at this age?
Yeah, the key there is balance. It's not doing everything, but it's not doing nothing. It's trying to find the sweet spot for you, so it's not a great answer. It's a good mix of when you do things, you do it well, but then making sure you recover from that, which is why we like the high-low approach we've mentioned before. So yes, big days are big days, but then you're making sure you're having some low and off days in between those, so you actually can recover. Sleep, nutrition, you got to get that stuff right. Like, it's a non-negotiable if you want to be a good athlete. The good news around it all is post our peak height velocity is when now we're starting to become young adults in a way. This is actually the golden window for adaptation. So this is when we actually see kids that have been sort of working hard, maybe not seeing much happen in terms of move the needle from a speed, strength, even on the field, and all of a sudden things just start to click. You start to see, they start to fill out a little bit. You see their speed start to pop. You start to see them get pretty confident. And that's just off the back of now, not just physically, you got hormonal changes. Now they're starting to see, all this work I'm doing is starting to pay off, which is why training before and during that window is really important, because now you're ready to really cash in. But if you haven't done the prep work, then you're still going to be stuck at kind of level one. And we talked about this before around, if you're day one with us and 17 and you haven't done much gym, you're probably starting on the same program as day one a 12-year-old, because your movement competence is at the same level. So we can't just go, because you're 17, here you go do some of the advanced lifts. You got to start with the basics. But if you've done the basics the whole way through and you've gotten good at them, you might not be crazy strong, but you're ready to start to load now and do the more advanced training because you put the work in.
And why is it so important that athletes learn how to manage their load at this age?
Well, it's a marathon and not a sprint. So if you learn how to load manage, it's going to really separate you from everyone else. The average athlete that burns out or gets injured or is constantly injured, you can then maximize. I think Darcy's a great example, just how much work he can do because he's just so good at looking after himself. Touch wood. So if you can understand recovery, you really learn how to protect your performance to really optimize every session so you get the most out of it. And then that, in short blocks, starts to stack, and then year on year, you start to see massive changes.
And that's where I think sort of being clear on your priorities, which is probably another discussion, really helps in terms of you tend to cut out a lot of the stuff that doesn't actually move you towards your goal. So if it's playing rugby, say if you want to play in the AFL, you're playing touch rugby at recess, or you're playing golf, you're doing extra runs, all this stuff that doesn't actually contribute towards your goal.
It's a good place to discuss quickly the sport specialisation. So it's talked a lot now in the media around being negative, and I agree. You don't just want to play one sport. What people take that though is, it's like, okay, well, I'm not going to I'm going to do footy and basketball, but they do both equally. So my advice would be, if your dream is AFL, AFL is the priority. Play a bit of basketball, but understand it's like a social part of it. It's just for a little bit extra training. It's like your gym. It's like others. You do that because you can fit it in. But if it gets in the way of footy, it's got to cut back. Like, I think the mistake is people try and do both the same, and now it's like two competing things. It's like, have a focus, do other things, swim, triathlon, like whatever it is. And ideally, if that thing can really help the main one, then even better. But even if they're completely opposite things, you just got to understand what's the main thing, what's the secondary thing, the accessory thing that works in the background, and then treat it as such.
Which probably does tie in well with the education piece, which we're about to speak about. So why is education so important for this age group, and what does it look like?
Well, athletes as they work through it, I think start to understand what to do, but the success they have will really start to depend on how and why you do it. So that it comes a bit more down to the details around how you're going to execute and why. So that is a big motivation sort of buy-in piece. So you got to be pretty deliberate with your thought and your mindset around that. Off the back of that, so we find a lot of kids are inconsistent. So first of all, but then it becomes, now I'm consistent in terms of I show up, but if you show up to a 6 a.m. session and it takes you half an hour to warm up, are you really showing up? So it's like, how do I show up with intent in the warm up? Yeah, so now I'm ready to go. I get something out of my mobility work and then I'm into my lifts and I'm ready to go. So that, because that seems like a fairly small detail, even if it's 10 minutes, but 10 minutes 3 times a week is half an hour. Over a year, we're talking 25 hours. That starts to be a lot of training that you're not maximising your output on and getting the most out of. Links into sort of awareness. I think the best kids are really aware of self and how they're approaching things, their technique, their effort, their focus. It's more than just the exercise they're doing, and we see it with, like, say, the swimmers, who obviously are very individual-based sports, very technical, very focused, especially our top ones. The gym group changes when they're in the room, just of how focused they are and how intent they are with everything they do. I think a big one that in this age group, and everyone, but particularly not every day is perfect. Some days you'll be flying and you think this is fantastic, but more often than not you won't be, and it is a bit of a grind. And that's normal, and I think it's the old rule of thirds. I think a third will feel great, a third will feel average, and a third will feel crap. And if you're only going to feel average or crap on 2 out of 3, you got to learn how to train through that, because otherwise you're only training 1 out of 3 sessions. So, and off the back of that, I think 100% effort on a 60% day is better than nothing. So if you know, look, I'm just going to do my best today, and I know it's not going to be my absolute best, but if I can give the best of what I've got, you're still moving the needle forward. But you got to control what you can control around that, like your recovery, your habits, all that sort of stuff, which, that's an ownership piece, and that's an everyday thing, not when you choose to. So you got to get your sleep, your hydration, your nutrition, so that you're recovering well. And a big one in this age group is the social media. The choice you make is what you consume on social media is either going to help your performance or take away from it. Your choice. Who you follow, how you use it as a tool can either be a distraction or it can actually be a great resource if you use it properly. It's sort of like the library now of the modern world. Instead of going and find sport books, you can just at the tip of a finger find some great advice. But you got to be careful, like we said, what you're listening to and who you're listening to and what you take on. But it's a great source, I think, of information and motivation if you use it properly. And the mindset stuff, so understanding that, like, real growth isn't just the physical. The mental stuff really separates the best. It's the standards, it's the self-awareness, which only comes through repetition. So if you avoid it, you'll never get good at it. One of my favourite quotes is, confidence comes from keeping the promises you make to yourself. So set it out, what am I going to do every day, what are my standards, and then just live by them. And if you do that, then you won't believe what happens in 100 days, let alone 1,000 days. But I've sort of experienced this, and you can touch on that the last year, with how I've tried to work on a lot of what I do and being consistent, and the results for me, I just wouldn't have believed it. So it's just about doing the work. It's not complicated, but it's not easy. That's the hard part.
And a probably easy one, I know that obviously Dan Martell's been a big person for you in terms of your growth from a personal point of view, and he always talks about his 5 daily non-negotiables, and for athletes it can be as simple as 8 hours sleep, eating clean, drinking a certain amount of water, whatever it is. They're just easy, simple actions that you do daily that just stack up over time, and you look back in a couple of years' time and you're pretty surprised how far you've come.
Absolutely. It's really about just building the structure, the discipline, and the self-awareness, because that is a long-term performance, life-changing, I guess, hack that those habits will hold you in good stead even beyond sport.